All right, thank you everyone for coming. I'm Nick Kukuru, and I work at Mastercard. I am the leader of the Enterprise Information Management team. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about today is governance, big data, security, and governance, and how to instill confidence. And that confidence is within your executive suite. That confidence is also within any auditors or anyone else from a regulatory board to let them understand how you're taking care of security in Hadoop. So that's what we're going to talk. We're not going to show code. I cannot show code to you, otherwise I will be on the street. I also can't talk about specifics, how the products get integrated. We can talk a little bit about the products that we use or how we use them, but not in details. So there's my disclaimer. If you're looking for code, you're in the wrong session. But if you're looking to see how Mastercard implements security in its Hadoop cluster, you're in the right session. And the other thing is, I am Italian, so I walk and I talk. I am from Texas, so you're going to get some y'alls in here. So from that standpoint, we should have fun. This should be interactive. If you have questions, ask me. You don't have to wait till the end. From this, though, that's our discussion session. This is what we're going to be discussing today as we take a look at this. The biggest thing I think that we talk about here is really the top 10 threats and the security pillars that we put ourselves around within Mastercard. So the other thing, though, is how many of you guys have Mastercards in your wallet? All right, how many of you don't? Get the hell out. Hopefully we'll show you how our security works so that you get a Mastercard. How's that? With that, this is Mastercard. We are not a credit card company. And I will repeat that. We are not a credit card company. We are a technology company. We provide the technology that processes the payments. And we are a services company. Most people know us for a credit card. They know us for our sponsorships. What they don't know is my division, which is consulting. We actually consult to our merchants. We actually consult to our financial institutions about the data that we bring together. So as we take a look at that, these are the things that we work with our customers on. Great question. Do we own the data or do the banks own the data? Well, in many cases for the transaction itself, the time, the day stamps, and everything of that nature, we have rights to that data. The customer, meaning the person who owns the car, and that PII data belongs to the bank or to the merchant. And if we work with them properly, we can work together in order to be able to understand as we create consumer profiles. Again, we have to have the bank's permission, and the bank has to have the consumer's permission. We generally stay in anonymized data. So we anonymize our data sets so that we can do an economic analysis. But again, that's a good question because that is something that people do ask us today, who owns and has rights to that data. Because in that first part, you'll see that we can monetize that data. But we're going to be talking about, and we also help people increase their analytic capabilities. Mastercard has a tremendous data set. We're not going to talk about that. That's a whole other world. But our transaction and consumer behavior is very powerful, especially with big data. What we're going to talk about is how we secure it, which is the base layer. So as we talk about this, as you think about Maslow's hierarchy, the bottom part of that pyramid is security and keeping the lights on, right? Once you take away security, people get real nervous, just like if you take away food, drink, or water. So as we take a look at Hadoop, 4 years ago, there was no security, or very little security. 4 years ago, we started to embark upon, with this community, how to increase the security posture of Hadoop. So we've been working for 4 straight years. And where are my colleagues from Mastercard? Are they in here? Smart people. Well, if they were, I'd be congratulating us because we have gone through our 3rd cycle of payment card industry certification. We are the only company that has gone through 3 cycles. So if you're asked when you go home, can you secure Hadoop? The answer is absolutely yes. And to the highest standards in the world, which is PCI. Those are some of the highest standards along with HIPAA that you can have in securing sensitive data. So if someone says, no, you can't, you better say, yes, you can. Mastercard has done it. Outscale has a PCI DSS certified environment, so is CSC, and those are just the beginning. We want more in this community. So as we take a look at this, and we look at what we do in reducing that risk, this is why we do this. Security is part of Mastercard's DNA. It's the one thing we always bring top of mind in the conversations. And that's because we have 2 billion cards out there in the world, over 220 countries, and we process nearly 160 million, actually it's about 180 million transactions per hour. And we apply 1.8 million rules to that data, all in real time. Those are those credit and fraud alerts that you get. That's Mastercard running around in the background. So as we take a look at that, here are the use cases that you asked for, sir. What can you use Mastercard data for? What do we work on? It's right here at the bottom. We are one of the rare organizations that can give a full customer 360, not just what they do inside your building, but what they do outside your building, where people are buying and what they're purchasing and what they're spending on. Those are big. We can tell governments and we can tell countries economic indicators. Again, people spending with their cards are important. And every time that card is used, we've got to make sure that there's confidence in both the user of that card, the financial institution, and everyone down the line that we are doing everything to secure that data. As our CEO has said, we are stewards of the data. We are not owners, we are stewards. Someone has entrusted themselves to us with their digital persona. Your credit card spending is you. Now, why do we do all this? Why do I get all excited about this? Because of this. We're under attack constantly. And what you want to get from this slide is it changes from year to year which industry goes to number one. Financial institutions used to be one of the biggest. Now it's healthcare. And manufacturing is running in second. The bad guys are smart enough to understand where the industries are that have sensitive data and not a lot of security. The other component to this is if you take a look at these cyber attacks in the top 5, you'll see some unusual people in some unusual industries. Transportation, again, generally low security, but a treasure trove of very sensitive data, including where things are being shipped to, how they're being shipped, and financial information. The other thing that we play with is, here's the big reason why. So as practitioners, if you go back and someone says, why security? Well, here it is. This is dollars and cents. That is a cost per record in the different industries of what it costs if you get breached or some information is stolen. And that's a cost per record. In some countries, a record constitutes a data element. So a name, an address, a phone number, an account number, social security number. I just carved off 5 records in some countries. Start doing the math and start multiplying it by millions. It gets serious. This is part of the business case that you can make to say, this is why we need to create security or move to a more secure environment. Mr. CIO, Mr. CTO, Mr. whomever. The other part that you take a look at here is, this is who's attacking and causing you to lose those records. The big aha here is the inside threat. Nearly 60% come from inside. Everybody within the Hadoop environment in the last 5 years have been worried about perimeter authentication and security, right? So once they're inside the firewalls, it's the guy in the firewall that you have to worry about. The guy who has valid credentials. Those are the bad guys. 60% of all breaches and data that is stolen is from inside the organization. Now, one of the things that you want to think about when you think about it is malicious insiders is 44.5%. When you think of the other one, which is inadvertent actors, that's the people who plug these into your PC. Inside the organization, sharing data, and basically there's some malware that could be attached to this. That's why we at Mastercard, you can't use a USB on any of our laptops, nor can you download data to our laptops. That's how serious we are about security. Everything is done on the servers. Everything has to come through the portal. So that's the first part of our security world. We don't allow these, but this is where the inadvertent things start to happen. The malicious insiders are those people that are inside the organizations who realize I can get paid $1 a record, which is a lot more than I'm getting paid in my salary. That's generally what you'll start to see from that standpoint. The other component here is, here's the top 10 infrastructure threats. Perimeter will always be there, but user authentication, environments that are secure that touch non-secure environments are another one that sits in here. That's the other part of when we deal with Hadoop, right? We have secure EDWs that hook up to a non-secure Hadoop environment. And as a result, once they connect, you've created a vulnerability point that someone's going to take advantage of. Because through Hadoop, you can see a lot of data in the clear. So again, these are the top 10 things that we look at, or when my organization comes in and someone says, hey, can you do a security audit for us? Can you help us understand our security posture? These are the first 10 things we start to look at. And it's not just the technology. Believe it or not, technology is the easy part. It's the people and the process, which is what we're going to talk about a lot today. It's people and process. These here are the top 10 data architecture vulnerabilities. This is around the data. This is why we always insist to try to get the data security to the data level, not the application level, not the system level, but the data level. This is something that we're not going to accomplish in Hadoop probably until 2017. But we're getting close. We have rows and columns now, right, that we can secure, so we're getting there. But we at Mastercard would like to move that as close to the data as possible. That's why, again, if you have a hint, we use tags. We tag our data. We classify our data and we tag it. Highly sensitive, there's 4 levels of highly sensitive data at Mastercard. There's PII data, there's payment data, and again, sub-levels in each one of those categories. All so that we can make sure we're protecting it. We take a look at this. This is the one to really pay attention to. Unauthorized access is probably the #1 place that people hit those vulnerabilities with. And when we say unauthorized access, it's actually someone who may be using a valid credential but should not be using that valid credential. They're using someone else's credential. Even though the system knows it's valid, that person using it because you shared it with them, who's now trying to get data or start to move around the system with your credential, is unauthorized to be there. That's why we at Mastercard, we actually monitor our users. We actually create patterns within our system that actually by user, everyone is predictable. When certain users start to hit up against tables or file systems that they've never hit up against, there will be a phone call that's made. And I've had that phone call happen to me when I've started new projects. Hey, we noticed you're going after X, Y, and Z country now. Is there a reason for this? It's like, yeah, we just started the project. It's like, okay, can you send us just the project manager, send us, the SOW just to make sure that you're supposed to be where you're supposed to be? It's not mean or anything. It's just like we have noticed something out of the ordinary. We've used our system to monitor what our people are going after and what they're doing. It's not to be big brother. It's just to make sure we know who's touching the data because it's sensitive information. The other part that we have in our pillars is these are the 4 that we work through. And these are the 4 that you'll need if you're actually going to go through a PCI audit. There's the perimeter security. We all know that. That's authentication. And it's come a long way within our world of Hadoop. And when you think about perimeter security, it's who's coming in. But for us, it's actually visibility is very big for us and auditing. One of the reasons for that is because if something happens and there's a breach, we will forensically go back and find out through data lineage, which God bless data lineage 3.5 years ago, we couldn't get anyone to do it in Hadoop. And now you've got people, now Ranger does it, Cloudera's platform does it, MapR is beginning to do the lineage very well. It's very important to be able to create the audit trail to see the scope and breadth of what that breach was. The other one is authorization. And for us, when we think about authorization, it's not just saying you have an authorization to be in that data, but when you leave the company or move within the company to be able to revoke that authorization. I was in Europe 4 weeks ago with a globally systemic bank, the new term for just the big bank that can't fail. And when we asked the question on authorization, we said, someone moved from this country to this country. Yep. And how do you know that this person's rights were revoked in this country? Because again, he's seen sensitive financial data. It's a bank. When he moved here, we trust our admins. Well, I got 2 teenage daughters. I trust, but I verify, and I validate. Because I was a teenage boy, right? So it's the same thing here. When we talk about authorizing, it's not just giving someone the ability to see the data. It's understanding when they should not be seeing the data and when it's time to shut them off. So we, within Hadoop, which is nice now, you just got some automated tools that can say, hey, these people have now moved. Their ISPs have changed in some cases from country to country. You can monitor that. You can monitor when the person, where the person, with the ISP, the access. You begin to actually sit back and say, why hasn't this person's rights been revoked here versus here? The system can automatically do that by its monitoring. That's very big. And by the way, at that bank, we found 23 people that could see the entire bank's portfolio that shouldn't. And that was within 2 hours of just saying, let's turn these logs, let's start monitoring some of what's going on. That's where the vulnerabilities happen. The other component here is architecting, and it's the data. Okay, and you really got to think about data now. It's no longer tables. It's no longer data marts and access and authorization to it. It's the data itself. And when I say that, you can sit back and say, well, I can understand I got this piece of data, I should lock it down because it's PII. It's not what I'm talking about anymore. What I'm talking about is when you combine this piece of data with this piece of data, in other words, a Facebook picture to a store transaction, to a third piece of data, which now becomes PII data because that's all I need to identify who you are and where you are in the world. That's all I need now. Those combination of those three pieces of data, which mean absolutely nothing to people, as they come together through governance, like Apache Atlas, when you classify them, now becomes PII data. So now at that point, when you talk about architecting, you've got to start thinking about how the data gets put together, not just the data itself. That's where tags come in. That's the value of tags. When you start to be able to tag them individually and by country. If you're a global company, each country has different PII standards. Europe is very different than the US. The Netherlands within Europe is very different than Europe itself. And when you hit Germany and Italy, oh, mamma mia, you're in a whole world of hurt when it comes to PII data because they are very restrictive. And the European Union, thanks to its wonderful world, can fine you up to 4% of your balance sheet if you let some of that PII data go. That's 4% of a balance sheet. We're not just talking, we're going to fine you $250 a record, your whole balance sheet. That came through last year. So countries and different regions of the world are getting very serious about the breaches and the data. I mean the data. So again, as we architect our Hadoop systems, we've got to be careful and give some thought. And again, we're going to come through some of these, but for perimeter security, I'm not going to tell you that you should think about Kerberos and Active Directory and LDAP. I am going to tell you it's essential to use Kerberos with your Active Directory and your LDAP. Essential. I know some people are like, well, it's an extra hassle, I got to add that to it. It's not when it comes down to some auditor sitting in front of you saying, so did you take all the right security precautions? Well, I heard this thing called Kerberos. Did you guys enact it? No. Oh, you didn't do that. Well, let me just write that down right here. You don't want that to happen. Kerberos is one of the best things to actually use along with your Active Directory. That's around the perimeter authentication. But what you'll see here is the process. You're going to hear a theme, centrally managed, throughout this entire world. Again, I love Hadoop. I was there 10 years ago when I thought it was just a little promise, right? Just a little baby. And it was great, the wide, wide world, right? But now at this point, we actually have to start thinking about how we centrally manage. It's not just his cluster or their node. It's centrally, how does it come together? It is where we were probably 15 years ago when we started to look at Teradata and Oracle. But right now, centrally managed authentication policies is really important. That allows you to manage both the authentication, the users, and everything that goes around the cluster and the different nodes. In this case, with access and authorization, same thing. Centrally managed access policies. I can't emphasize this enough, that are monitored. The perimeter security should be monitored in real time. We have those capabilities in Hadoop. Again, 2 weeks ago, when I asked a merchant, how often do you look at your logs? We looked at them in November. Oh, November, okay. November of 2014, they didn't look at them. They're not looking or actively looking at those logs for authorization and accessing the access security. We have Hadoop. We can monitor them in real time. And I can't tell you how many times we've gone through an audit or forensics saying there's been a breach, and we find out that breach actually started 6, 7, 8 months ago, and the logs showed it. So again, as you start to take a look at that perimeter security here and any of it, mine your logs. They are a wealth of information to fight cybersecurity and to understand what's being done inside of your world. With visibility, this is a really important thing for us at Mastercard. It's lineage. Very happy to see lineage has come such a long way. Such a long way. This is how you instill confidence in your InfoSec officer. All right, this is the way. When you can show them, here's how the data came in, this is where it went, these are the people that have touched it, this is what is transformed, the transformations, and here's everything down the line in a neat little picture. Executives love that because they're not going to look at anything else but a picture. Are there any executives in the room? So yeah, they like pictures, and those lineage pictures that you'll see are very important. Also to your auditors, if you actually come in with PCI audit or HIPAA, you want to be able to walk them through what you're doing. So lineage and auditing is really important. If you don't have those tools in your particular distribution platform, you need to get them. And you need to make sure that they're working. The other part for us here is data security. This one I will spend time on because this is really different for some folks who come from a relational database world where it's just I can lock down tables and things of that nature. I want to get to the data, and I want the tags to be the metadata as well. And I want the data to actually be encrypted all the way through even to the logs from that perspective. All that sensitive data, and we have those capabilities now. If you're not using HDFS encryption, get it started. Not hard to do. H-base encryption as well. All encryption is not equal, so you actually do have to give some thought to when you want to use it and how you use it. And that goes back to the data classification. So when you come to figuring out your encryption strategy, you're going to come back and say which data needs to be encrypted all the way through from start to finish. We at Mastercard, it's from ingestion all the way through to storage. And oh, by the way, we actually will go back to our tapes that have been put in Iron Mountain and re-encrypt. So we just don't let them sit there. So as if we change our encryption policies or we change our encryption methods, we actually go back to all the data, and that's almost 18 petabytes of data that we have sitting there in storage, and we will actually go back and re-encrypt it all. That's how cautious we are around data. I don't expect anyone else to probably do that, but it is one of those things when you take a look at encryption, part of the policy is actually to take a look at what you want to encrypt and how often you should re-encrypt. The other part for us is these are table stakes now. These aren't nice to haves. So if you look at what we have here, these are the table stakes. So if you're thinking about Hadoop, you need to go to your platform distribution person and say, do you have these, right? Do you have the audit and data lineage? Very important. Everyone's getting there. But the other part is, can I embed the security in the metadata? There's another big one. And then, do you have hardware-enabled security? How many people are interested in Project Rhino? We are. We're very interested in Project Rhino, where the security is going to the chip level as well. Very, very interested in that one. It's been a slow process, but it's one that we're still looking at. These are our best practices at a high level. These should not be any new information for a lot of you. Some of it is the segregation of duties. The segregation of data access, though, that one will get you, especially when people are used to having access to everything. This will be your marketing team, by the way. If you anonymize or encrypt your data and you just give them the information they're looking for versus name, address, our policies that we use anonymized data analysis. So any PII data is stripped before it goes to the analytics team. And that includes our marketing team. They perform whatever they want to do to create their campaign lists. It comes out. They identify these are the ones we want to do something with, and then they are re-identified. But when we took the whole thing of name, address, whatever, email address away from them, they were screaming like little babies. Because they're like, we should carry that all the way through. It's like you don't have to. You want the end results. Data access is actually one of the processes around and the people that you have to do a lot of explaining to when you start to lock down the different data elements. And they're going to look to you to say why. They will blame IT. They will blame the programmer. They won't blame the person who created the policy, probably, which sits 4 or 5 levels above you. They will come to you, and you're going to have to explain to them why, right? You may not want to, but you're going to say, hey, or you just say, call so-and-so. But data access is a big thing within Hadoop if they're used to having full access to everything. The other one is that third bullet. It's a continuous knowledge transfer. You're continuously educating people about the cluster. I can't emphasize that more. We probably do more education to our InfoSec officers, to our businesses, to our auditors, to our PCI auditors about how Hadoop works than a lot. Best practices, over-communicate, because they're the ones who can shut you down. They're the ones who can make your lives miserable because they don't understand. When you have a PCI auditor come in and you say, here's how Hadoop works, and he's like, what do you mean? You're replicating data across 2 or 3 copies, across 3, 4, 500 servers? Oh my God, that's just, oh my God, there's breaches everywhere, and red flags go up, and it's like, warning, Will Robinson, warning, right? You're like, no, really, the security can follow along with the data as it moves through the cluster and the node. Well, how does that happen? And you explain it to him, right? And then what happens 3 weeks later? He has a mental lapse, and he's like, so how's this done again? Can you explain it to me and my boss and my boss's boss, how that works? And it comes down to us to explain that to them. And then documentation. This is big. It's documentation, which we all don't like to do, but thank goodness we have some good tools now to actually can pull out documentation for us. The lineage tools, you can actually show the diagrams, our, the architectural diagrams that can be generated. A lot of that can be now automated in a way versus having to manually type it. But documentation is key for you to be able to instill confidence. Here's the policy. Here's how we enable the policy. Here's how we validate and validate the policy. It's all right here, even if it's a Visio diagram that shows the flow. Very important. And then for us, strong authentication on the technology side. And I'm not talking 2-factor. I'm talking multi-factor. Not just a password and an ID. I'm talking a password, an ID, a PIN that only the person knows, an RSA token that you may have in the pocket, which creates 4 factors. Multi-factor is the way to go with Hadoop. Multi-factor, not just 2-factor. Again, what you want to have is something that the system knows, but something that the user only knows. Bare minimum. You can go to biometrics too, with, but that's a little bit crazy with the fingerprints and the retinal scans. So usually an RSA token or some type of PIN that someone has to put in once they're authenticating to the server should do very well to reduce unauthorized access to your clusters and unauthorized access to your data. The other one, regular penetration testing. How many knows what a penetration test is? How many people have done it on their cluster? How many people do it once a quarter? There you go. Those are my champions. How many only do it once a year? Get yourself down to a quarterly basis on penetration testing if you can. We do it once every quarter or once we actually penetrate test once a new version of any of the applications or services are put on our production servers. We will penetrate test at that point as well. But I can't tell you how much when you talk about instilling confidence in people, penetration tests are very, very good to be able to have someone say, we are constantly checking. And what does that mean? If you ever have a breach and you show that you're being proactive, you're in better shape if you're going into a lawsuit. You're in better shape if you're going in front of a judge or in front of a regulatory board because you're saying, I am proactively trying to take care of my security. I have done everything I can. I just didn't write a policy, check a box, and say it was done. I'm doing regular penetration tests, not once every 2 years. I can tell you right now, there's a large bank that has not done a penetration test on their Hadoop cluster in 4 years. And it's a large bank. And they're running production data through it. And they're running sensitive data to it. I just walked away and made sure that we didn't have any accounts at that bank at that time, but that's a whole other point, right? Penetration testing is really key here. The other part that we can talk about here is our lessons learned. When you talk about Hadoop with people, you gotta always emphasize it's not one thing, it's a collection of things. It's not one thing, it's a collection. That's that education. You know, why did it take us 6 months going through our third cycle of PCI certification as it took to go through the first cycle? That's because what we went through in the first cycle was very different than what we went through in the third cycle. We added to the cluster and we took away, which means you've got to go back through the entire process. And you've got to emphasize to your auditor, this is how it changed, this is what we're proving to you. It's a collection of things. It's not an Oracle database. It's not a Teradata database. It's about 10 or 12 things put together. The other part for us was education and documentation. The one thing we all hate to do, but that's 60% of the effort. 25-30% was technology. Hands to keyboard. You guys saw it, as you guys went through some of these things with Spark and the way we're doing it, the way that Ranger's working now in these sessions in the last 4 days. I went there, and I'm like, that's the easy part. It's the knowledge transfer, it's the education, all of that, and documentation, which is the majority of the work. And again, go ahead.
How long have you been using Hadoop and just only Hadoop now? Or?
No, we're not only Hadoop. Here's the other thing that we will say. So the question is, how long have you been using Hadoop? Hadoop has been under consideration for over 7 years at Mastercard. It's only been in production 4. And the reason is it's only been in production for 4 is because we figured out how to secure it. It took us 3 years. We don't put anything into production unless it is secured to the Mastercard standards, which are above and beyond PCI. It's our standards. If Netherlands tells us this is what security is here, we apply that to every country, every piece of data. Mastercard holds itself to a high standards. So it's been 4 years that we've been in production with Hadoop. It's not only Hadoop. Yes, we do have Oracle databases that run. And I will tell you why. Because when you talk about instilling confidence, if you have regulators, you have financial reports that have to go out. Those auditors, Ernst Young and those people, because that's where I started. I started at Arthur Andersen. Anybody remember Arthur Andersen? Yeah, good company. But that's when we come in and we're very comfortable in how those reports are put together. That's the last thing that you're probably going to take off the mainframe and move to a Hadoop cluster. So you do have to create, the terms are used, data hub, the ecosystem, they do have to talk to each other.
You can decline to comment, but if you guys experienced breaches, and how did you find them?
Here's a good question. Have we experienced breaches? The answer is no. The other answer is we see about 3 million attempts a month on average trying to penetrate our network. So knock on wood, we have not seen a breach.
Or you haven't detected one yet?
Good question. We're in a constant state of always looking, but we have not had a breach at Mastercard. And we're proud of it. We know that we are always diligent and paranoid about it. But yes, we do fight off about 3 million. And that's because we're proactively using the systems to monitor. System monitoring is low-hanging fruit. Turn your monitors on, turn your logs on. And again, if you have Teradata, don't turn everything on in Teradata on the logging systems because that'll bog down the system, right? Turn on the right things, which is really around the data and the user access and user authentication and things of that nature. The other part for us on the lessons learned, the thing is security is not quick, it's not easy. It's painful. Sometimes it's like a proctology exam. You don't want it to happen, but it's got to happen. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, especially when you deal with people and processes. Technology is easier to implement in IT than it is in the business side. Security is easier to implement in IT than on the business side because the business will always think you're trying to restrict them. But what you're doing is actually protecting them. When you explain to a chief marketing officer the reason we have the security in place and you're not seeing name, address, and phone number through your analysis is because we don't want you to be brought in front of court. And in court, where you're liable as a chief executive officer of the company. Oh, you're kind of saving my skin. Yeah, we are. Okay, I kind of get that. I can deal with that. Those are the kind of things that you got to be able to make sure you're educating on. And one last thing, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back. Close collaboration with your partners. And those partners are both the business side, the partners are your distribution partner, meaning the people that you're working with, how security has been put together. Third-party partners like auditors, bring them in early. Educate them early and often, not just at the end, because their job is to find something wrong. If you bring them at the very end, they're going to find a lot more things, and then you're going to go back through an entire and unnecessary cycle. Bring them in early. I know you don't want to always show off the kimono, but it's very good when you're talking about security, especially with the audit people. Oops, wrong way. There we go. What do? Here's the first 5 things you should be doing. You should be able to assess your security maturity around people, process, and technology. The second item you should be working on is classifying your data into categories. This is where Apache Atlas comes in very well. That part of the community is very, very good. The other part is start your real-time monitoring of the systems themselves. Also, take inventory of your current Hadoop infrastructure. If you need to add to it, find out what you need to add to it. There's been so much in development in the last 6 months, and there are so many new things coming out. Again, go back to the cluster and say, do I need to add components? And the other one, start to identify some of the training needs that you're going to need, not just yours, the organization.
So you've gone over a lot of high-level things. Is there resources on the web or at other places where you can start to say, here's a good first cut at how I would structure my Hadoop installation? Things I turn on, the things I turn off, why?
Yeah.
People have a template for people to start with.
Yep, and the question was, is there a good place where people can go to find out what they should be turning on or off? Believe it or not, the documentation that's come out with MapR, I'm going to go to the distribution guys right now to answer that question. But between Cloudera, MapR, Hortonworks, and Pivotal, their documentation that's coming out is actually very good in regards to what can be turned on or off, or what you should be enabling when you start to put on your Hadoop cluster. So if you go back into their documentation and you look at when they do the installation, they will have the recommended setup. And then if you actually ask the next questions, like I need more security enabled, I need these type of things on the log files, they will come back and they'll actually say, here are the things that we need to switch on. So actually your vendor actually has that documentation. On the web itself, you would go to their documentation depending on your distribution. That'd be the place to start. And it's their configuration manual that you're looking for. The other part that we have here is, here's the maturity model. This is one of the things that we use, but again, there's many of them out there. Again, this goes across people, process, and technology. The people and the process is what's going to hurt you more than the technology. Because I can tell you right now, you can get to a level 3 with the security that we have. That's PCI compliant or HIPAA compliant. They're out there. It's the process. The other component here is, that's where you start. So if we're working with our customers to say, what should our infrastructure begin with? We're like, here's your building blocks. You need to have your encryption key management. You need to have HTFS encryption. You need to have H-base encryption. We got to start looking at Yarn, and we got to look at our data management layer where we're starting to apply the security at that point. Now you can add to this, and I know because of the ecosystem, but there's the starter kit. And then we work with our customers to say, at that point with the distribution person, what needs to be turned on and off at those components. And again, I can't emphasize encryption and metadata and security key management enough. Again, when you manage your encryption keys, they do need to be separate. They have to have separate administrators. The keys do not go with the data. That's usually a big thing that we find with most companies who are using Hadoop. The same administrators in charge of both. The other part here is, there's Apache Atlas. This is the data classification. This is a great starter kit on how to start to classify data. We are very excited about this, and I'll tell you why. For 2 years, we've built our own Apache Atlas on data usage and data classification. Apache Atlas shows us the value that actually that data classification brings, along with the governance. Because again, governance is not just taxonomy, transparency, accountability, right? It's not just controls. It's not. Governance is now stewardship, ethics. People are asking, just because you have the data, should you use the data? Right? How do you use the data? Just because you can send an email doesn't mean you send an email 4 times a day. Just because you have someone's address and you can send them a message doesn't mean you continuously pound them. How do you use that data? And when you monetize data, that's where the ethics start to come into play, where you give them permission. So if I take a look at this, there's the summary. 60% of your breaches are internal. So you've got to be watching what people are doing and monitoring your systems, both the data and the perimeter. Security is an end-to-end process. It doesn't just stop in the file system. It goes all the way through ingestion, all the way to the reports. The other part here is you've got to assess people, process, and technology. And then governance is data usage. It's not just a piece, it's data usage. And the last one, don't confuse compliance with security. You can be compliant, but not secure. And the one thing, in the very beginning when I said I have a secure environment, it's fully compliant, that is hooked up to a non-secure environment. Am I secure? I've got a breach. That's when people confuse compliance with security. Don't confuse the two. You've got to go beyond compliance to make sure the cluster's secure. And with that, I'm done. I actually think I'm over time. It's 3:40. Any questions? I've got questions.
You also have to have some level of trust in people.
Mm-hmm.
And in the extreme case, if you assume nobody is trustworthy on your team or in your company, no security would work. So how do you guys balance that?
Trust and verify. So that's actually, we balance it by making sure that what the person did, they say they did. So again, we use a lot of automated tools that are able to say when we refused access or authorization, that it actually went through all the way through the system. Because we just want to make sure that that happens. And it's an easy one. We're not trying to accuse anyone. On the trust and verify thing, it's just being able to say, we know you did your job, and you did it right. And again, we use automated tools to do that. We look at those things. Again, and we make sure that people understand why we do it. We just don't do it. We have awareness training 4 times a year, why we're so security conscious, so they understand that.
So you mentioned you have Oracle and possibly other relational databases also in the mix.
Mm-hmm.
You get to talk about the security challenges maintaining Hadoop along with the other relational platforms.
The security challenge between Oracle and Hadoop. The big thing actually is, for us, we manage those challenges. There are, in many cases, but that's where I think for us, that's where the LDAP and the Active Directory and what the permissions are within those. We carry those over from the Oracle database. If you're moving into the Hadoop environment, we look at those credentials. We use those to try to mitigate the issues that can happen. I think the other component that we look at is in Oracle databases that we generally see or we've done, we haven't done enough good tagging within the metadata itself. So that usually is a challenge for us, bringing those tags over. So again, it's when you take a look at that, it's like, okay, so as I bring in on ingestion, that's why a big question I have for the folks in ingestion today is how can I, on the ingestion and transformation, start to apply tags and the rules that I have here in Hadoop to the data I'm trying to offload into the cluster. Does that help?
Yeah, I'm in healthcare. We're starting to see this more and more. What percentage of your IT people are dedicated to security and follow that? Are they embedded with teams, or is it a separate organization?
All right, so the question is well, how many people are in our IT organization are part of security, and are they embedded in other organizations? Here's the good answer. Everyone is security in IT, the entire department. But we have 3 pieces to the pie that come together. Operations and technology, which is IT. They sit next to the business side, and then they actually sit underneath. We have a governance council. So they are completely at the table when it comes to the data that we have to now go. We go one step further. This triumvirate is actually governed by our attorneys. So we have a lot of legal people that are trying to tell us how to stay compliant, and operations technologies really are at the table saying how we can enable that within the technology. Altogether, within our Hadoop environment, there's probably about 30, 40 individuals that are involved. The organization itself, that little triumvirate, is about several hundred because we go worldwide.
So have you found an encryption or tokenization solution that you're happy with across the various data stores? And can you share with us what that is?
I'd love to, but I can't. It's about encryption and tokenization. I will say this, you've got to use both. It's not one or the other.
Right.
It is definitely HDFS encryption, H-based encryption, very good. We like those a lot when it comes to Hadoop and how it works. We also are, oh, yeah, we are over time.
Got cut off now.
That's okay. I can't blame.
You need to get set up.
Okay. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Maybe you can take this out in the hall and
Okay.
continue.
So,
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you.
so I'm with a small startup. We're building a 1,000 core hardware Spark accelerator in a 1U